Coming up next, Phoenix's new ordinances aimed at cutting production of crystal meth are taking effect. We'll have the details. And Phoenix was home to a national program honoring our troops in Iraq. We'll talk to proud school principal and mother Barbara Lake and also State Representative John Nelson. I'm Councilman Dave Siebert, and that's coming up next on The Issues. Welcome to On the Issues. I'm Councilman Dave Siebert. New Phoenix ordinances regulating the raw ingredients criminals use to make crystal meth are now in effect. We passed the ordinances a few months ago to cut down on the production of the dangerous drug. Here to talk about the importance of the new measures are Captain Jay Strebeck and Captain Pat Carlisle from the Phoenix Fire Department and Sergeant Tommy Thompson from the Phoenix Police Department. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sergeant, you know, we have these new ordinances that have taken effect. Tell us, from the police department's perspective, why the measures that we took are so important.
Methamphetamine has been a problem in our community for a number of years, and the production of methamphetamine in clandestine laboratories poses a safety hazard for the community as a whole, as well as individual neighborhoods and children. To cut down that flow and that production of methamphetamine, we felt it was necessary to go right to the source. The chemicals that are specifically dealt with in these laws are pseudo-ephedrine, ephedrine products. That is a precursor drug, which means it is necessary to produce the methamphetamine.
So you can't produce any methamphetamine unless you have the pseudo-ephedrine or ephedrine.
That is correct. And therefore, if we can take that one chemical and make it more difficult for the drug lab, the cooks as we call them, to produce methamphetamine, then we've taken a giant step.
Well, in talking about how bad methamphetamine is in our community, I want to break it into two pieces. And that's what the Meth Task Force that Councilman Simplot and I were working on this last summer. One side of the equation is the labs. The other side is the actual meth users themselves. Now, the part that we're dealing with in these ordinances are the cooking in our community, the meth, the chemicals. So let's talk, since that's the part of the equation we're working with, let's talk about some of the chemicals that are used and what they will do and how volatile that they are.
Okay, we talked about pseudo-ephedrine and ephedrine. Again, a precursor chemical. Without that, we don't manufacture methamphetamine. So that's why this is a law that's aimed at cutting that. We also use red phosphorus. Red phosphorus is used on striker plates for matches. The problems of red phosphorus is obviously it's a pyrotechnic chemical, and as it goes through the cooking process, it converts from red phosphorus to yellow phosphorus and to white phosphorus. White phosphorus burns on contact when it comes in contact with the air. But what is a terrible problem associated with red phosphorus is as it burns, as it converts, it creates phosphine gas, odorless, colorless, and highly lethal.
Deadly.
So that's where when we come upon a cook, as we call it, where there may be a person that's dead, or when the colleagues from the fire department get there, there's a good chance that those gases have been omitted, and that's what's caused that person to die. So now the issue is, did it affect just that room, or did it affect the neighbors? And that's what the problem is with that one.
And the fact that a lot of these labs have children living in the same home. In fact, the chemicals in many of the pictures that we have, the chemicals are actually stored in the baby's room and sometimes in the baby's crib.
Absolutely. That is, the children is one of our greatest concerns, the children of meth cooks and people involved in methamphetamine. Set aside the violence that accompanies meth, and if you're talking specifically about the cooks, imagine that atmosphere. How many times have we gone home and your wife, your mom is cooking a loaf of bread, or we just passed Thanksgiving, you've got the turkey that's cooking, you smell those odors in the air. Well, when you're cooking methamphetamine, you have the same problem. Aside from those chemicals being next to the baby, you've got the airborne problems associated with those chemicals.
Okay, and that's a good reason to go to the fire department. Gentlemen, thanks for being here, specifically to talk about the hazards of these chemicals and what it can do to children. Give us some of your experiences.
over the years, you can just tell a meth lab, somebody that's been cooking, because of, like Sergeant Thompson talks about, the effects in the home, the way that people are acting, just the things that are going on. It's just a terrible atmosphere for children, for anybody for that matter. But I think this ordinance, these laws that are enacted, are going to help us to curtail at least some of the local cooks and get some of that stuff out of our neighborhoods.
And that's really the idea that we have behind it. We know we're not going to stop the entire methamphetamine problem, and we do know that they're going to bring more methamphetamine across the border, but at least they're not cooking and creating these hazardous situations. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit. Captain, when you go into, or one of your firefighters go into a burning house, you may not know that it is a meth lab. And so here you go in, you may have your SCBA, but you're maybe not dressed for a total hazmat situation because it's a residential structure. Talk about some of the dangers it is to our firefighters who have to go into these places.
Yeah, many times our first response crews have stumbled into drug labs. The nature of the lab is volatile and hazardous, and they create a lot of fires just naturally. From the outside at night, the first due truck does not know there's a lab inside. They're going to go in and search and rescue that building. And a lot of times they stumble into these products and they're contaminated, have to be deconned, and so it's really dangerous for the first responding trucks to stumble into an unknown lab.
And with your experience of dealing with, being paramedic and dealing with injuries to people, what is this doing? I'm not referring to the fire itself, but the kids being around these chemicals.
I've been to a lot of labs, and I think the biggest thing that I've seen over the years, and the thing that's broke my heart, is the kids. The kids are just completely neglected. They're dirty, they're malnourished. The people who are doing the drugs care nothing for the kids. They're just kind of cast off to the side and just left to their own devices. And that's the really sad part of all the labs I've been to.
Yeah, that's a major tragedy because they don't have a say in the environment they're being brought up in. They don't even know they're being poisoned. And sometimes these kids are 1, 2 years old, can't fend for themselves.
Totally neglected.
Totally neglected. And let's talk from the PD's perspective. We'll get back to the ordinances themselves, but so the public hasn't seen tweak or a person on meth. Give us some of the descriptions of what they may look like and what meth does to a person.
Well, we use the term tweaker. That's a kind of a slang term that we use to describe someone who does amphetamines, methamphetamines. And it's because typically they get skinny, it reduces their appetite. Sometimes they'll stay up for 3 days and then sleep for maybe another 3 days afterwards. The best way that I can describe the effects of methamphetamine is, imagine if you have a motor or an engine and you race that motor engine. It just runs and runs and runs. Well, there's a life expectancy of that motor. Typically, when we see people who are involved in methamphetamine, around the office we just comment that they look about 10 years older than they really are. There's an extreme paranoia. When we have bizarre crimes, we just automatically assume that, or believe that methamphetamine was involved in that.
And in most cases it is.
Yeah, case in point, a number of years ago, there was and it was within the last 10 years, there was a van that was being chased by police, and it was the one where the father actually cut off the head of his 15-year-old son and threw it out the window because he thought he was the devil. That's bizarre behavior. We get calls from people who believe that we have satellites. We're looking at them through the registers for the air conditioning system. All of those things it's just bizarre behavior.
They think bugs are crawling on them, and they'll pick at their skin until they have scabs all over themselves.
That's correct.
Their teeth rot out within a couple of years. And you mentioned people looking older than they really are. I've seen some of the pictures of a woman that's in her mid-30s, been on meth for 2 to 3 years, not more than 3 years. And the woman looked like she was in her 70s. Gray, wrinkled skin, leathery looking, sores all over, skinny. It is really, really disgusting. But anyway, let's go into some of the things that are in the ordinance. First of all, it is required now to be behind the shelves or behind the counter, off the shelves. And it's also a possibility of forfeiture. In other words, the retailer will get one warning, and then the police can seize the products, and at the same time they're allowed to have a hearing, but those products have been removed from the store. It is a misdemeanor. They are required to keep a log book, and that log book has to be turned into the police department at least once a month. And they have to have photo ID, and the only photo IDs that we accept are a current driver's license, a current passport, a current tribal identification card, or a current military identification card. So it's fairly limited. It has to be a legitimate government ID, picture ID. And tell us what you think that's going to do in the reduction of meth labs.
Well, first of all, the law is not designed in any way to make it where people can't obtain these drugs. What we've actually done is this law partners us with the community, the vendor, to be able to help control the problem of meth labs. Now, what happens historically is, first of all, a normal person, if you go to the store, if I went to the store to buy Sudafed for my daughter or my son, I would buy maybe one, maybe two boxes. 9 grams is the amount that they're looking at.
Which is about how many packages?
About 3 boxes. It depends on how, what strength the pills are that you're buying.
And then that's what the state allows by state law.
Yes. And again, the precursor chemical for methamphetamine. And what it allows is, by having an identification, it lets us find out is this person, is Tommy Thompson going in and buying a bunch of Sudafed from this store, then walking right next door and buying more, and then going down the line. So it gives us an avenue to follow up and find out, wait a minute, this person doesn't need 10, 20 boxes of Sudafed.
Right, and they call that smurfing.
Yes,
right?
And that's what the community needs to understand. This law, again, is not intended to make it where you can't obtain these drugs. It's to give us a tool and partner us with the community to be able to track down the people that are involved in this crime.
And I know a lot of the retailers are, in fact, even some of the drug companies are pushing the drugs that do the exact same thing that do not have pseudo-ephedrine or ephedrine in them. I think that's one of the misconceptions, is you have to have that precursor chemical in a cold remedy for it to work, and that is not the case at all. There are many drug companies that are really promoting their non-pseudo-ephedrine, non-ephedrine products that do the same job. You won't have to sign a log for them, but if you want the ephedrine, pseudo-ephedrine product, you can still get it. You just need to sign the log, and you can get your 9 grams or 3 boxes worth of product.
Absolutely correct. And the average citizen doesn't have to worry about anything, because again, if I go in and buy 1 or 2 boxes, it's when I go to the next store and buy 3 more that same day, 3 the same day, and at the end of the day, I've bought 30 boxes of pseudoephedrine.
Well, and with these logs and the accessibility, since the logs are going to the police department, it'll be much easier for the police department to be able to track down the people who are doing what is known in that world as smurfing, which is highly illegal. It's violating state law. It's violating city ordinances. But what this really does is gives us the ability to actually catch them.
That's correct. To take a proactive stance in it.
Great. And back to the fire department. Your guys have done some really courageous things in pulling people out of buildings. And if we are successful with this, tell us what you think your fellow firefighters will think when they go in a building from now on, and they don't have to worry about the high probability, if it's an explosion, that it was a meth lab.
I think it's just going to make us feel that much more safe. One of the things that we haven't mentioned so far is these guys tend to booby trap their labs and do some other things too that make it more dangerous for us, aside from the chemical effects. So if we can eliminate that from our danger chart, then makes us that much more safe in our operation.
Well, that certainly is our intent, because as you said, whether it's booby trapped or whether it's just the chemicals in there that are hazardous materials in and of themselves, if we can get this problem down to just the meth user and the importation of this terrible drug, then it makes it easier for the police department to catch the people who are bringing it across the border, and the fact that the labs are now across the border and they're not creating this terrible contamination in our neighborhoods and around our children. So again, gentlemen, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.